Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church in Columbia, South Carolina, where we're part of the ELCA. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. As I have mentioned before, and even earlier this week, before I came to Redeemer, I was serving a church in a beach community. There was one circumstance when some people from Ohio were gathering with their family at the beach and asked if I could do their wedding on behalf of their pastor back home. I talked with that pastor and got his approval, and we scheduled a time. They wanted a brief sermon during the wedding, and I still remember what I said as we gathered out on the beach itself. In Hebrew, I told them, the word ruach means three different things. That same word means wind, breath, and spirit. In Genesis, it begins by saying a wind from God moved over the waters. And perhaps it means that God's Spirit was there. Later on, God breathes into Adam's nostrils with the gift of life. And that breath may also mean that God filled Adam with God's Spirit. We are gathered here on the beach for this wedding. And I have noticed that I don't ever remember being on the beach when the wind was not blowing. So as we gather here and feel the wind blowing on us, know that God's Spirit is here too, blessing, strengthening, and supporting you in your love and in God's love. Maybe that's not such a bad idea, to remind ourselves whenever we feel the wind that God's Holy Spirit is with us. This week we have been exploring St. Paul's views on salvation, how it works, and what it means for the Christian life. And today we come to Paul's thoughts on the involvement of the Holy Spirit in our salvation. Before we dig into it, however, I do want to mention that in these reflections each day, I have mentioned one or two things that Paul wrote, and it has crossed my mind that you may think those verses I cite are the only things Paul said about that. Nothing could be further from the truth. I'm simply giving you one or two clear examples of many, many places where Paul expresses similar thoughts. These were not single thoughts he had one time. They represent the central thrust of his theology and thought, repeated over and over. So, with that said, let's turn to Paul's thought about the Holy Spirit and salvation. And Paul is convinced that the Holy Spirit is deeply involved in the Christian life to assure us of the salvation we have received. We have been given the marvelous gift of grace, and the Spirit applies the finished work of Christ to our hearts. The Spirit takes what Jesus accomplished and makes it real, personal, and experiential. Paul sees a contrast between life in the flesh and life in the Spirit. For Paul, life in the flesh reflects the old self, the self that tries to live independently from God. The flesh is self-reliance, self-rule, self-salvation. It produces frustration, guilt, and spiritual exhaustion. Life in the Spirit, however, produces life and peace. The Spirit empowers obedience, not by force, but by transformation. Let me give you an illustration to help us understand this. Trying to live the Christian life in the flesh is like rowing a boat against a strong current. You strain, sweat, and struggle, but you never make progress. Life in the Spirit is like raising a sail. The wind does the work. You move not by effort, but by surrender. Maybe another way to think about it might be an orchard. I bet Paul had Psalm 1 in mind, which describes the person faithful to God being like a tree planted by a stream of water. Such a tree has a ready source of nourishment, and it abides in joy where it is planted. Just so in our salvation, we abide with the Holy Spirit, a ready source of nourishment for our faith. Maybe more importantly, the Holy Spirit abides with us. It turns out that this has a lot to do with our lives here and now. In Galatians, Paul describes the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. In our salvation, in the grace we have received, we are no longer trapped in cycles of defeat or despair, but have been set free to live lives bearing that fruit for God. Our lives aren't just saved, they are transformed. That's what the Spirit does. By the Spirit's work in us, we are made new in order to live for God here and now. We bear that fruit here and now. The Spirit is not a distant force, but a present helper. The Spirit frees us from condemnation, empowers obedience, produces fruit, assures us of adoption, and guarantees our future glory. The Christian life is not about trying harder. It is about living connected. It is about striving. Rather, it is not about striving. It is about surrender. It is not about fear. It is about freedom. It is about transformation. This is life in the Spirit, the life Paul invites us to live. Thanks for sharing these moments with me, and remember to let this day belong to God.